Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another video. Back with another forecast discussion today. We've got our first day in a succession of what appears to be 3 days in a row of severe weather threats for parts of the country. We'll start off today, day one, Sunday, October 23rd here. Slight risk out for parts of southwest Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, down to the south into western Iowa, eastern Nebraska, and northeast Kansas, surrounded by a big old marginal risk there that extends all the way from the Canadian border down to the Kansas-Oklahoma border. Also a small area of marginal risk there in northwest and west Texas. Going to be focusing for the purposes of this video on the main severe risk up here to the north. This will be mostly an early morning threat tomorrow morning as storms fire there. And then we'll go into day two. Tomorrow, Monday, October 24th, slight risk from far southeast Oklahoma down through central and south Texas into parts of eastern or western Louisiana, surrounded by a big marginal risk there with an all-hazards severe threat there as well. And then we move into Tuesday as the threat shifts to the east, parts of Louisiana, eastern Arkansas, into much of Mississippi there. So a powerful storm system taking aim on the U.S. here in multiple waves here, as you can see. We've got a multi-hazard severe threat today, 2% tornado threat up there to the north today with a damaging wind and hail threat. Same thing for tomorrow down to the south, as well as Tuesday in the southeast. So an active stretch ahead. We're going to go through all 3 of these days in this video. We're going to focus on today and tomorrow and look ahead toward Tuesday as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we do that, I want to give you a little bit of a look into the fire weather outlook as well. That's going to be probably an overlooked part of this event here. Critical fire weather conditions exist here from eastern Colorado, western Kansas, the Oklahoma Panhandle, up into the southern half of Nebraska, with an elevated area surrounding that. So if you live out here in the plains, you know that the winds have been very, very strong the last couple days, and that will continue, and we'll show you why here in a second. But the fire weather threat is going to be definitely elevated into the critical stage today for this area of the country. So keep that in mind as well, along with the severe threat that is on the table. So let's go ahead and get started. This is our water vapor satellite imagery. Let's take a look at what's going on here. A few things you can see. We've got a big old trough here out across the southeast coast there. We've got the you can see the outer bands and kind of down even toward the core there of Hurricane Rosalind that is making landfall in Nayarit, Mexico there this morning. You can see the cirrus overcast there spreading out into South Texas from that. And here's our big old trough that is going to be our main player for severe weather, at least today. And then tomorrow we kind of get that joined up with this you can see this patch of southwesterly flow here out across Baja California. That's that little cutoff low we've been talking about out here. That's just been kind of sitting out there off the Baja coast, the Southern California coast. That is going to be pulled eastward by this big old trough, and they're going to kind of merge today. And there's going to be kind of a complex evolution to the 500 millibar pattern, as you'll see in a second. So we'll break that down in a second, but that's what's going on. Big old trough here. It's going to be our main player out over the west that's going to move off to the east and be our big factor for today and the next couple of days. So here's our visible satellite imagery. We'll pause it right here. You can see we've just got some high cirrus here out over Mexico and South Texas. Mostly clear skies out here across the target area for today from Minnesota and the Dakotas down south through the southern plains. Just some high clouds here out across Oklahoma and Texas, but not much to speak of here as far as our target area. So surface heating should not be an issue for today, although we're going to need a lot of it to overcome some of the negatives in the setup here for today. We'll talk about that in a second as well. Let's look at our 500 millibar pattern here. So you can see just a massive, massive trough here out across the western half of the continental U.S. That is going to be our main player for today. Here's our cutoff low off the coast of Baja California. You can't really see Hurricane Rosalind down here, but it's going to be somewhere down in this vicinity here in western Mexico. That's going to move off, make landfall this morning, move off toward South Texas by the overnight and early morning hours tomorrow morning. Let's go down to 700 millibars. See if we can pick out some short waves here. Closed circulation here at 700 millibars. Right there, you can see a little kink in the flow here, so a little short wave there, a little short wave in here possibly, so a little one in here. So several different short waves that are going to be rotating around kind of the main, sort of the base of the main trough here, and help provide some, I guess, smaller scale little engines that are going to help initiate storms within this setup. 850 millibars here. You can see we've had a very, very strong mass response from that big old 500 millibar trough making its way over the Rocky Mountains here. We've got southwesterly flow traversing the Rockies, and you get surface low development here on the lee side or east side of the Rockies, and we've had a very, very strong mass response here. You can see just a very broad low-level jet here out across the entirety of the plains almost. 40 to 50 knots here out across West Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas. Is spreading northward here into the main target area for today's severe weather event. So very, very strong low-level jet that should maintain itself. And we'll take a look at the surface pattern here. Just an absolute unit of a surface low out here across northeast Colorado, 988 millibar low. That is going to move off toward the northeast today. And you can see why it's been so windy and why it will continue to be so windy out across the plains today and into the next couple days, and why we have this critical fire danger out here. You can see the pressure gradient, these pressure contours. You can see how close together they are. It's what we call the pressure gradient, the change in pressure over a certain distance. And when these isobars are very, very close together, that drives wind speeds. The winds are going to be stronger when you have isobars that are much closer together. So you can see out here across the central and southern plains, those isobars are very, very stacked close to each other. And that's why it's been so windy the last couple of days, including today and the next couple of days for the southern plains. So again, this low is going to move off toward the northeast today. Got some sort, it's kind of hard to pick out the frontal features here. Maybe some sort of warm front in here, a little bit of a pressure tongue there. That will probably continue to lift northward as we go throughout the day. Maybe, it's kind of difficult to tell, to be honest. Maybe some sort of cold front in here that will shift off toward the east as we go through the day today. But again, absolute beautiful surface low there across northeast Colorado, and that will continue to deepen and move off to the northeast as we go throughout the day today. So here's our surface data here, our surface plots, and you can see we talked about the moisture issue, the moisture return issue with this setup, and that same thinking is on track for today. You can see up here in the eastern North Dakota there, dew points only in the 30s right now up into Minnesota. Dew points in the mid to upper 40s, even some 50s there in southern Minnesota. But it's not really what you want to see on the day of a severe weather outbreak if you're looking to see severe weather. We don't have enough time to get those 60s dew points, which I'll show you are going to be down here, confined to Texas into Oklahoma here. You can see up to 60s dew points up to the Kansas-Oklahoma border there, and everywhere to the south here into Arkansas and much of Texas, we've got 60s dew points. But they're just going to sit there, and they will be there for tomorrow and Tuesday's event. But again, for today's event, going to be hard-pressed to get all this juicy air all the way up there into our target area for today. So once again, we'll go back up here. You can see the winds are very, very strong here. 20-plus knot surface winds here across much of the region. You can see southeasterly flow here feeding into that surface low in northeast Colorado. But again, it's going to be tough to get those high dew points up here into the region. So moisture definitely going to be a concern today. And we'll take a look now at some thermodynamic profiles here, some SKU-Ts. We'll start off here. Let's start off at Omaha. You can see what's going on here. Very, very deep EML layer, elevated mixed layer here out across much of this region. You can see the very steep lapse rates, warmer temperatures here in this layer, very strong inversion here at about 850 millibars. Very, very steep lapse rates in this layer, and they're emanating from upstream here. If we go toward North Platte, you can see that layer, very strong layer, elevated mixed layer there, translates off to the east with that southwesterly flow aloft, and that's what we're seeing here. Very, very stout elevated mixed layer, capping inversion on the atmosphere here for much of the area. This is Aberdeen, South Dakota. You can see much of the same. You can see in this layer the max lapse rate 9.3 degrees Celsius per kilometer. That is almost dry adiabatic, which is very, very steep lapse rates, very warm air in this layer, which has, again, been transported out off to the east. And so we're going to need a lot of help to get storms to go today. Now, the forcing up here toward the north is going to be a little bit stronger today. You can see, and we'll take a look at the models in a second. So that may help overcome this a little bit, but I have a fear that this capping inversion is really not going to be overcome. It's very, very strong capping inversion there across the region. So I have a hard time thinking that that's going to be overcome fully, but with the forcing moving into this region, we may get storm coverage this afternoon, late this afternoon into the early, mostly after dark into the evening. And I have a feeling that these storms will be elevated here, which will negate the tornado threat. Again, there is a 2% tornado threat out for today. I question that a little bit. I don't, I think that it's good to put a 2% out there. Of course, with the wind profile going to be so strong, we saw that low-level jet and strong trough aloft. There will be a profile favorable for tornadoes. The question remains: are we going to see elevated storms? What is the storm coverage going to be? Because this may negate storm initiation completely, this very, very strong cap. And if storms do initiate, are they going to be elevated? And it looks, given this very, very strong elevated mix layer, that is going to be the case for tonight. So we'll look at some model data now. This is the 12Z NAM that's coming in as we speak. So again, as we said, complex evolution of the 500 millibar pattern here that's going to modulate what we see with the next couple of days as far as severe threat goes. So as we go through the day today, you can see that first kind of elevated or band of flow here impinging into the northern plains, into the upper Midwest there. Nice divergence aloft here. You can see the diffluence in the wind vectors here across Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, Minnesota there, that region there. So the forcing out here will be a little bit stronger. You can see a little bit of troughiness there, a little bit of a shortwave there in the flow that may help initiate storms here this evening. But that main belt of flow does hang back a little bit. You can see what happens here. That main belt really starts to impinge into the region overnight into the early morning hours Monday morning. And we get this kind of secondary band, this kind of other piece of the trough that really breaks off here into the desert southwest, into Texas, and that's going to be our main player for tomorrow's severe weather event. Right now, focusing on today, you can see that that northernmost kind of shortwave moves off toward the north. We should get, believe we will get some storm development given just how strong the forcing will be up there to the north. But again, I think storms will stay elevated there as we go into this evening. Low-level jet, you'll see, will maintain its strength throughout the day and even get stronger throughout the evening hours as it usually does. That's just very, very strong, 70-plus knots there across eastern Nebraska into Iowa there. So very strong low-level jet. The wind profile should be pretty strong with this system. We'll take a look here at the moisture. We'll go back here, and you can see the moisture just really doesn't quite make its way all the way to the north. We do have some patchy 60s here, a little bit of a layer of 60s dew points, which is better than what the models were showing a couple days ago, but still don't know if it's going to be enough to overcome that stout capping inversion there that we saw on some of those morning soundings. So we'll take a sounding. We'll take a 60 sounding here, southwest Minnesota, ahead of that. It's kind of dryline feature, dryline cold front feature there. We'll take one down here into the Kansas-Nebraska border. So you can see here what's going on the NAM. 65-degree surface temperature. I think by 6C that'll be somewhat accurate. But you can see the low levels. We have not completely destabilized there in the low levels. Not much 0 to 3 kilometer cape to speak of there because of kind of weak lapse rates there in the low levels, as remnants from that elevated mix layer that tries to erode but doesn't quite get there. We are somewhat unstable though in the upper levels there, and a very strong wind profile. We do have a strong low-level shear in play. Some backing in the winds here at about 2 to 3 kilometers aloft. Not great. If we can get a supercellular storm mode, a discrete storm mode, that doesn't matter as much, but this may hamper things a little bit. And if we do get storms to fire, they may be a little bit messy in nature. But again, low-level shear, if we can get storms to fire, and if storms can drill through that cap down in the low levels, or we get a little bit more destabilization than was expected, we may see somewhat of a tornado threat there, although I believe we are going to stay a little bit elevated with those storms, given that little bit of kind of weak lapse rate layer there as remnants of that EML. Mostly going to be, I think, a damaging wind threat as storms fire with the strong forcing there. You can see with southern extent, still that EML really hanging on there. Not much instability to speak of, even on the NAM. NAM tends to overdo instability a little bit, even though it is kind of cool biased here usually. But you can see the wind profiles here. Very, very scary wind profiles. If this was May, as I've said in the previous video, if this was May and we had moisture to work with and not as much of an elevated mix layer, this would be a pretty significant severe weather event, whether it be a very, very strong squall line with some embedded tornadoes, damaging winds, or a supercell tornado threat. This would be a pretty strong event. 600 effective SRH there. So very strong wind profiles here. Not surprising given the very, very strong low-level jet. But again, I think storms are going to stay elevated here given the very strong elevated mix layer in place. So again, for today, looks like forcing is going to be stronger here to the north, but moisture might be a little bit weaker there. So eastern South Dakota into western Minnesota there. The northern portion of the outlook area there where the tornado threat exists. But again, I think the moisture there is going to be weaker where the forcing is stronger. So storms, again, I think all over the place are going to remain elevated if they do form. Southern extent, especially here, at least on the NAM here, showing a stronger elevated mixed layer to the south. So I do think storms are going to remain elevated today. We'll take a look at the HRRR here. We'll start off with the Central Plains sector here, and you can see we get patchy storm development here by about 0Z, all the way down to the Kansas-Oklahoma border up toward the kind of South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa triple point there. Just some patchy storms, nothing of intensity though. You can see that we don't get, the HRRR is not showing a lot of intense convection here. We'll go off to the north a little bit and see, and we just don't get a lot in terms of robust storm development. I think that's due to the very, very strong cap that remains and doesn't quite erode fully. And the storms that do form are likely going to be elevated. We'll take a sounding out here just out ahead, and you can see just a very strong capping inversion in place there. So storms will remain elevated. Large hail with these storms is going to be a threat, as well as damaging winds if they can break through that surface stable layer there. Will be a threat as well. Tornado threat, I think, is going to be on the low side. Non-zero, but I think is going to be on the low side, just given the overall elevated nature of the storms. All right, so that takes care of today. We'll go into tomorrow now and take a look at what we're seeing. As we said with our surface data, when we looked at it, we've got our reservoir of 60s dew points sitting down here in South Texas, and as that piece from the trough breaks off, you go back here to our 500 millibar map, you can see that northern portion. So a couple of things going on here. You can see the remnants of Hurricane Rosalind right in here, going to move off into South Texas by this evening into early morning tomorrow. You can see that cutoff gets pulled, that was off the coast of Baja, gets pulled off to the east right here by the main trough. But you can see that for that kind of northernmost portion breaks off, and we get this southernmost portion to start digging, kind of that composite closed low off of Baja, and now this secondary portion of the trough. Remnants of Rosalind out in here by Monday morning. Expect that to bring some cloudiness and rain to the region here, South Texas here. So that may play a role in what we're seeing for instability there in the evening. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out, how much remnant showers and cloudiness is associated with the remnants of Rosalind there as it moves into South Texas tomorrow morning. But here is our trough. So overnight you saw that marginal risk for the early morning hours tonight into tomorrow morning. A little bit of a shortwave in here that may initiate some storms by 12Z tomorrow out here. It looks like we're going to have an initial band. We'll look at 700 millibars, see if we can see a little shortwave in there. And you can definitely see a little bit of a shortwave in here out across West Texas there. And if we go back to the HRRR, let me pull that up real quick. If we go back to the HRRR and we look at tomorrow morning, we're going to get an initial band of storms out here across west and north central Texas here. You can see the remnants of Rosalind bringing some showers and cloudiness out here to South Texas, early morning hours. This is overnight tonight into tomorrow morning. You can see we do get an initial band of storms here out here from Oklahoma into west central to northwest Texas there. So an initial band of storms, likely some sporadic strong gusts in here, but the main trough is still hanging well back out to the west. And you can see we do get some additional storm development here Tuesday evening. So as this moves off, so the initial shortwave here going to initiate some storms tomorrow morning for parts of Texas into Oklahoma along the cold front. And so, but this is by Monday evening. You can see that trough at 500 millibars is trying to close off there. Very strong, compact trough here moving into Texas. So we may see storm development as early as late tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow evening, as that moisture is just sitting there. Again, we'll have to watch how instability is affected by the early morning round of storms, showers and storms that fire out here across northwest Texas into Oklahoma. Should be some clearing behind it as that shortwave moves off and this main trough moves in. But the timing is a little bit off. You can see right here our shortwave approaches West Texas there. Let's go to 850 millibars here. Very strong low-level jet in place, but you can see it's a little bit off, displaced out here, out ahead of the main shortwave. You can see the shortwave is back in here, the main low-level jet out here across northeast Texas into Arkansas and Louisiana. But we will get surface low development out here as that trough makes its way. So you can see today's surface low, really strong surface low moving off toward the northeast. We get additional surface low development as that secondary trough moves in Monday afternoon and evening right in here. So right out ahead of that, winds will back out of the southeast to out behind that initial line of storms. Again, we have that nice juicy air mass sitting down there. NAM shows 70s dew points here. So our cold front surging to the east up to the north where that first trough was, but just kind of sits there until about Monday evening. So we may get storms to fire out here along this kind of dry line cold front hybrid here. It's not moving a whole lot. So we may have a window for supercell development here maybe early tomorrow evening for a couple hours. Supercells may begin to fire out here along this dry line. Take a sounding from in here. Right as that trough starts to move in and impinge on that dry line region. Take a sounding out here. Then you can see overnight, right away, as that trough moves in, the cold front starts to surge and it pushes off toward the east. And then we'll talk about Tuesday in a second. So you can see by 0Z, we've got some low-level shear to speak of, very long photographs. So that would favor supercells with almost 60 knots of effective bulk shear there. Decent instability. These storms will be a little bit low-topped. You can see the tops of the storms there, right about 300 millibars. So somewhat low-top storms. We do have a lot of low-level instability here on the NAM, 216 joules per kilogram of 0 to 3 kilometer cape there. So very strong instability in the low levels right before that trough moves in. 75 over 67, so juicy air mass there at the surface with some veering of the winds in the low levels. So not a super favorable environment for tornadic supercells there, but I do think supercells are a possibility tomorrow evening out there across kind of north central Texas down through central Texas, the hill country, and south Texas as well, right along that dry line. Maybe for an hour or two we'll have a threat for supercells before that front really starts to surge to the east. You can see that right by about 3 to 6Z it really starts to surge as that trough moves in, and then we should get very strong frontal forcing there, which will force things into a squall line. But I do think there will be a window for supercells there. Atmosphere is completely uncapped, strong low-level instability there by 0Z. So, there's a chance that we could see some isolated supercells here develop along that dry line cold front hybrid before the frontal forcing takes over. Overnight, you can see that the low-level jet is going to ramp up quite a bit here as that surface low in Texas moves off. You can see out ahead of the frontal zone as it surges east. We should get a pretty decent wind profile here. Not a ton of instability out here with eastern extent, but there is enough, I think, to sustain that line of storms that moves off to the east. Very strong low-level shear here. Very strong low-level jet. Surface winds out of the south-southeast at 10 to 20 knots there. So nice large looping photographs here in the low levels. Any embedded supercells within the line would have a tornado threat here. Only a 2% tornado threat out for the moment here for day 2. I would not be surprised to see them up that to maybe a 5% out here for northeast Texas down through all of East Texas to the Gulf Coast into western Louisiana. Would not be surprised to see this 2% expanded and them add a 5% come, maybe even as early as the day 2 outlook today. But we'll have to see on that. Definitely a tornado threat, embedded tornado threat within that line. Damaging winds going to be a threat as well, given the strong low-level jet, strong momentum transfer to the surface via downdrafts there. The hail threat, if we do get isolated supercells initially, early in the evening, they would have the greatest threat for large hail. But I think damaging winds and some embedded tornadoes is going to be the main threat, with the main squall line as it moves off to the east. We'll take a look again at the HRRR. You can see it doesn't have much after this initial round of storms. You can see it doesn't really have much here as far as storm development here. Just along the southern portion of the main line, you can just see it kind of does that. I'm not sure that I buy that solution completely. Let's take a look at some other models, other cams for tomorrow, just kind of compare. I never really look at the NAM 3 kilometer, but we'll take a look at it for now since we're looking at the regular NAM there. We'll see what the NAM 3 kilometer is showing for tomorrow. So you can see the initial round here Monday morning moves off to the east quickly. Should have a window for destabilization behind that. Looks like some clear skies behind that as Roslyn's remnants and the initial line move off well to the east. We should have some clearing behind that. So several hours of destabilization behind that. And then by about 3Z, we do get initial development here. Maybe some semblance of cellular development in here along that dryline frontal hybrid there. Some cellular elements in there before kind of a quick transition to a squall line there. Not surprising that the NAM 3K is showing this. It always shows either nothing or a squall line. So not surprised, but I do think there is a window, given the meteorology here, probably from about 0 to 3 or 4Z, if we can get isolated supercell development along that dry line. If we can get development along the dry line, I think they could be discrete, given that the frontal forcing really has not arrived yet, and the front is not really surging yet. Once the front surges, may tend to undercut storms here, and mostly be a damaging wind threat. Although, again, we saw the wind profiles there. Any storms that can remain surface-based within the line will have a we'll have a tornado threat along with the damaging wind threat. We'll see if this is out far enough. Not quite out far enough with some of the other models here. Let's try the NSSL warp that's out a little bit farther here. Again, taking these with a grain of salt. Cams, any more than a few hours out from an event are not really that useful, but you just want to kind of get an estimate of what we're seeing. And you can see that first line moves off. Not much in here by 0Z, so it looks like mostly an after dark event tomorrow as well. Similar to today, but I think storms will be more surface-based here with some tornado and damaging wind threat as well as a large hail threat if we can get supercell development early on. Okay, so this line will move off into the east for Tuesday. We'll continue on into Tuesday morning, and that is going to be our main threat for Tuesday morning. It's going to be along that line from eastern Louisiana into Mississippi as it moves off to the east. So you can see we'll go back here to 500 millibars. We'll go into Tuesday. You can see the trough moves off. Very compact trough here. Very, very small, compact trough in here moving off to the east. And we should see that should help maintain the squall line as it moves off to the east from East Texas overnight into Tuesday morning and afternoon. Low-level jet remaining strong across the region as that mass response to the surface low remains very strong low-level jet. So wind profiles here should be very, very strong. So not expecting any weakening of the squall line as it moves off to the east. The warm sector, however, we always talk with these southeast events, are we going to see prefrontal storms here? So a couple things going against prefrontal storms here. You can see that the warm sector itself is just very, very narrow warm sector here out across Mississippi and Alabama into Tuesday morning and afternoon here. We do have some juicy air in place, very moist, unstable air mass here out ahead of the squall line, but I'm just not really seeing any threat for prefrontal storms here. Now there does appear to be a little bit of a prefrontal trough sitting out there across Mississippi and Alabama. That actually might be the warm front, as we saw there on the dew point map. That looks like the warm front there. So that is your warm frontal zone. just maybe with southern extent there's a little bit of room, but I just don't know if there's enough room for prefrontal storms out here in this kind of narrow warm sector here for Tuesday. If we can get storms to fire out here well ahead of the squall line, southeast Mississippi, southern Alabama, and kind of interact with this warm front, they may have a chance for that. We'll see if there's any little kind of shortwave, maybe some semblance of a shortwave out there ahead of the squall line. Again, I think the main severe weather threat is going to be the squall line for Tuesday as it moves off toward the east. Can never count out prefrontal convection, though. I think there may be just enough room to work with out ahead of the squall line, which will be racing east, though, not to mention that. So we're just not going to have a lot of time and room for there to be prefrontal storms out here, but definitely need to keep an eye on that for Tuesday. If we can get a better chance for prefrontal storms here, there may be a little bit of a window before the warm sector pinches off and that squall line moves off into kind of toward Alabama there, that we may have a chance for some isolated prefrontal discrete supercells there, any that interact with the warm front. We'll have a chance to produce tornadoes, but again, that's a very, very conditional threat, and again, the main threat is going to be along that existing squall line that is going to be along the front here, moving from eastern Louisiana into Mississippi Tuesday morning into early afternoon. Let's take a couple soundings out here out ahead of the front here, out ahead of the squall line here, across Mississippi. Go out here, just a few, kind of sample the environment here. You can see very strong wind profiles here. This one's a little bit contaminated. Very strong wind profiles. Not much instability to speak of here on Tuesday, at least here according to the NAM. A little bit of a warm layer here aloft, a weak lapse rate layer aloft. So that'll be the question there that may impact the robustness of the squall line as it moves off to the east. We can't really gather up enough instability there. The squall line may not be as robust as it moves off to the east. This is northern Mississippi here. A little bit more low-level instability here to work with. Very strong low-level shear. So I think the squall line is going to be, again, the main threat. Let's take one out here in the warm sector here in Alabama there. This is at 18Z, so just after lunchtime Thursday. And you can see just not much instability here. We'll have to watch that. If this is the case, then there would not be as much of a severe threat out here with discrete storms out in front of the line, and the line itself would be a little bit weaker. So we'll have to watch that and see what happens. But again, I think Tuesday, the main threat is going to be with severe storms along the squall line, with a caveat being instability. Less instability, as what's being modeled on the NAM right now, then we will see a less robust squall line and a better chance for just kind of some general thunderstorms with maybe an embedded severe wind gust here or there. More instability than forecast, and we will have a chance for a stronger squall line, chance for some embedded tornadoes given the very strong low-level shear in place, as well as some damaging wind gusts as well. So that's going to wrap things up here. Again, we have kind of a multi-day severe weather outbreak on tap for parts of the country today, looking at that slight risk there from parts of northeast Kansas up into South Dakota and Minnesota there. Again, very questionable about, some questions remain regarding storm coverage as well as storm intensity. There looks to be a very strong cap in place that doesn't appear to erode fully. So today looks like very patchy storm coverage, stronger forcing farther north, but less moisture in that area as well. That's where the main tornado threat is. Wouldn't be shocked to see them back off of this as well, and maybe even downgrade to a marginal risk throughout the region, given the questions on overall storm coverage and intensity. But if storms do form, they would have a hail and a damaging wind threat, especially down here in that slight risk area from southwest Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, down to the south into northeast Kansas. Tomorrow, Monday, looking at a severe threat here for East Texas into Louisiana. Mostly, I should mention today's threat, mostly going to be overnight, after dark, as well as tomorrow's threat. There is a window, I think, for some isolated supercells along the dry line here early tomorrow evening, Monday evening, here from north central Texas down through the Texas Hill Country there. But places like Austin, San Antonio, out toward Lufkin, Waco, Shreveport. Squall line tomorrow night as that front starts to surge as that trough moves in. Squall line going to be the main threat. Some embedded tornado threat does exist with that squall line as it moves off to the east. Main threat is going to be damaging winds, though, with that as well. And then Tuesday, that squall line will continue off to the east. Again, questions remain regarding instability here with this squall line. Looks like very meager instability out ahead of the squall line, but there is a slight risk in place for the Mississippi River Delta there into much of Mississippi, including Jackson, Greenville, places like that. Damaging wind is going to be the main threat. We'll have to keep an eye on the threat for prefrontal convection here out across southeast Mississippi into southwest Alabama. But again, instability looks pretty weak, and that is a very, very conditional threat right now. So that's going to do it for this video. A little bit of a longer one today, but it's a pretty complex severe weather threat on tap for the next few days. So that'll do it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.